Welcome to episode 14 of the Gospel Culture Podcast. On this episode, Tyler Margeson, yes, the man himself, once again joins me for another discussion. This time, we talked about how the gospel changes the way we feel about others and interact with others, and then we spent some time talking about how patriotism and Christianity can live alongside one another as we seek to live lives that are faithful to God. We continue to slowly approach 1,000 downloads of the podcast, so there is still time to get your entry in for a book giveaway. Here's how it works. Send an email to mailbag@livinghopechurchpa.com with the title of the podcast episode that you've enjoyed most. And when the podcast gets to 1,000 downloads, I'll randomly choose from the entries. And if you are the winner, you will receive a free book of my choosing. I will endeavor to make it a good book. All right, let's get into my discussion with Tyler Margeson right after this. Okay, so is it a GIF or is it a GIF, Tyler? You know my position. I believe, and I don't just believe, because I'm not into faith when it comes to this
You're
issue.
an originalist.
I'm an originalist, the creator of the graphics interface.
Right.
Called it a
graphics.
GIF, even though I know it's graphics. But he says it's a GIF. I go with the inventor of the GIF.
Well,
Where do you stand on this?
I'm more of a. I would stand by the general conventions of phonics in the English language, which a G preceded by a short vowel would be a G sound, as in gift. You add a T onto that same word, and you have the word gift.
So you are a GIF progressive. You
Correct.
believe it's a living acronym.
Well, right. It's sort of like a piece of art.
No one can really. It's just whatever you feel.
Well, what the interpretation, how it lands on me, yeah, absolutely. In this regard, art is the same way. You know, the artist tries to say something specific, and it might be interpreted differently, by different people.
All right. Well, I think we've lost everybody that started listening to the podcast, so let's move on. Thanks for coming back.
It's always a pleasure, Ben.
Love being able to hang out with you.
For sure.
So I've been thinking for the past couple of days about just specific ways that being a Christian affects my life in terms of how I think about people.
Yeah.
And how I move toward people. I mean, of course, we both would believe, because the scriptures say, and our experiences testifies to it, that being a Christian is, of course, not just being a part of a club or, signing on to a religion.
It's not an internal thing.
But there's new life and regeneration. We're born again, and the Holy Spirit's in us and giving us new hearts and new ways of interacting with the world. But it is remarkable to think specifically about before and after, or even just watching how God changes one throughout the course of their life as a Christian. When I think about my life before becoming a Christian, when I was 27, I really didn't like people, for instance.
Yeah.
It's a very strange irony that I'm a pastor in so many ways, but I didn't
God moves in mysterious ways.
Yeah, well, I'll say. And I like my friends, and I would make new friends sometimes. But if I was out in public, just interacting with somebody, a stranger.
Pretty closed off.
Not just that, but fairly hostile.
Oh, all right.
So, if I'm in line at the grocery store or something like that, and, a well-meaning, friendly person would, turn to me and perhaps, make some small talk.
Hot today, isn't it?
Yeah. I would just sort of glare at them, like, do I know you? I don't know you. I don't know why you're talking to me right
Trying to act
now.
like you know me.
Yeah. And of course that changed. There was this
Hopefully.
fundamental change that happened. That another thing that was really interesting is all the time I was growing up and into my teens, and I would say into my 20s, I had a great fear about public speaking. I would not speak in front of a group of people. I remember in high school taking an F on a project because there was a presentation.
Really, you had to speak in front of the class.
In front of the class, and I just said, I'm not doing that. Give me the F. And I got an F
Wow.
for that. So,
I mean, you didn't like it to the point where you rebelled.
yeah, I refused to do it.
Wow.
Is how I was. So, and then of course, God saves me at 27, and then I become a preacher. Which
Yeah.
is another pretty.
It was sort of like a Moses situation. It's like, Lord, I'm not eloquent. I don't speak well.
Yeah.
It's like, God will give you the words to speak.
Yeah. So,
That's
but
cool.
there's a number of things. So I just see that like in my life with when it comes to people, I'll find myself interacting with people, pursuing people, engaging with people that they're not always the most pleasant people. So
Sure.
there's nothing sort of in my flesh that makes me just sort of lean into them. But I
Right.
find within me, these impulses
Mhm.
and desires to serve people, to move towards them, to befriend,
Yeah.
be kind, and those sorts of things. It's just sort of remarkable to think about.
Well, and there's no reciprocation. I think I
Yeah,
think there's a
right.
natural tendency, especially relationally. I want to spend time with people where I'm going to get as much as I give. In that, there's a reciprocation of the love or affection or the good humor or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I enjoy that time. That's why I enjoy spending time with you. I enjoy spending time with you because as much as I think I give in our friendship, you give back. And so there's this reciprocation. It's out of, I think, our brotherly love for one another in Christ. So
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think that happens in the church, and it should. But yeah, interacting with people outside of the church or who aren't Christians, or even people who are new Christians and are still immature in their faith or things like that, there's an aspect where you love them, and there's not much you're getting in return from them. Now,
Right.
from the Lord, there's eternal rewards there. But yeah, it is interesting to see how that shifts your mind. It's like, I'm not just going to enter into relationships or pursue people where I'm going to get something out of it. Like, I'm going to pursue people where there's nothing that
Yeah.
they're going to be able to give back.
Yeah. I mean, Jesus talks about, it's easy to hang out with people that
Right.
you
We
like,
just heard
even Gentiles
with
too.
covenant mercies. Covenant mercies? The where you adopt a child?
Yeah. In Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I'm wearing a Covenant Mercies T-shirt right now.
You are.
Yeah.
Do justice, love mercy.
Shout out to Doug Hayes at Covenant
Right.
Fellowship. Yeah.
Well, he just recently preached
Right.
about invite people to your house knowing that there's nothing they're going to be able to give to you, using
Yeah.
the parable that Jesus spoke of. It's like when you have a party, don't invite the rich and your family and friends who are going to be able to repay you with inviting them back. It's like invite the people that are going to eat all your food and make a mess in your house, and then you're...
Sounds like my kid.
Yeah. Because
Well,
then
maybe not eat all
God's
food.
were going to reward you for that.
Yeah.
There's a reward from your Father in heaven.
So there's 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation.
Yeah.
The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come." And I think what's interesting is it's easy to think maybe about like personal morality and refraining from certain sins and fighting
Sure.
sins of impurity and things like that. That's part of being a Christian. But this, so much of what we're commanded to in Scripture has to do with this ethical way we treat other people.
Right. The love.
So there's
yeah.
this fundamental shift, this change, this transformation happens in becoming a new creation, not just in how I act personally in my
Right.
private life, but even more so in the way that I interact with the world and the people around me.
Right. We're supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves, but then Jesus even adds to that, we're supposed to love our enemies. I mean,
Yeah.
that's hard. That's a hard saying.
Right. Very hard.
Yeah.
Is there anything, what kinds of things have you seen in your life when it comes to how God's changed the way specifically you feel about interacting with people, or
Sure.
your experience of moving towards perhaps people that aren't the most pleasant or enjoyable, or let's just say that you don't prefer?
Sure. Well, I was actually thinking about this. So when it comes to, there's two specific instances that and they're more of just, I guess, interactions with people over the course of time. But when it comes to the people's view of marriage. So when I was in college, I was a senior in college.
Yeah.
And I was already engaged to Jess, and we were going to get married. I think I graduated Penn State in May of '06, and our wedding date was the July 1st. So we just celebrated 13 years a couple days ago.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. So I remember very distinctly speaking with anticipation and hope and excitement about getting married. And so many of my classmates who were not Christians are like, oh, don't get married. It's awful. It's horrible. It's just going to trap you. And so just this idea that I had a very different mindset, or God had really changed my view of what marriage is and what it functions as.
Yeah.
Whereas them, it was just a social institution that just trapped people in this unnatural monogamy.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, it was like, it is a reflection of the church and Christ. And it is a good thing. I mean, God created the entirety of all creation and said one thing was not good, and that was that Adam was alone, and so he gave him a helper. So, I mean, there's like from the very origins of creation, God's intent or God's plan for marriage is a beautiful and wonderful thing. And so it was, I just noticed a huge difference in that regard. And then also, even since I've been married now 13 years, just interacting with people who aren't Christians, be it at work or whatever, where it's a drudgery. There's no affection or love there. I mean, they're committed to their marriage, but at every opportunity that they can, they'll grumble and complain about the difficulties of marriage, because relationships are difficult. It's a mess. It's hard. And so, through God's grace, to try to speak well of my wife in those instances, or ask them questions that would direct them towards affectionate feelings or thoughts or discussions about their spouse, or what they might appreciate about their spouse, things like that. So those are two specific instances, specifically in college when I was about to get married, but then also just working in the general population, if you will.
Yeah.
Just the difference in thoughts in marriage, and specifically interacting with your spouses, and trying to encourage folks and point people to marriage as a good thing, not something that they should feel burdened by, but they should enjoy.
Yeah, it seems to me. I mean, there's a of course, I've similarity in some regards to what you do as a police officer, what I do as a pastor, because our job is to deal with people.
Yes.
And I do not deal with as many unpleasant people as you do. That's for sure. But I certainly, from time to time, have to have difficult conversations, interact with people that it doesn't seem like we're quite on the same wavelength.
Right.
Being gentle and patient, kind in those moments. I don't know how. I remember in the book by Richard Baxter, the Reformed pastor, where he laments the large percentage of unconverted pastors at the time.
Wow.
And I just thought, how in the world could you possibly do the job of being a pastor unconverted?
Right, without being transformed, yeah.
Without being, well, at least without being an impatient and unpleasant jerk yourself.
Sure.
So like how does, but you deal with all sorts of difficult situations.
Difficult people, yeah.
Yeah, so how does, the reality of what Jesus is doing in you when it comes to changing and growing you in the way that you care for people,
and
the way that you interact with difficult people, how does that factor into how you approach difficult people in difficult situations and the way that you treat them and interact with them?
Well, right. Yeah. I mean, it's tricky. I mean, there was a specific incident even yesterday where a gentleman, he ended up getting, not by me, but he ended up getting pepper sprayed and got wrestled by a bunch of corrections officers. And I arrested him for public drunkenness. And it was a very difficult situation. So there's instances where if I physically have to take action, and I had to kind of wrestle with this guy a little bit when I took him into custody, and
Wow.
and then he decided to fight with the corrections officers when we got to the booking center. There's instances like that where, you use as much force as necessary to keep the peace, and in that moment love everybody else.
Yeah.
Loving the people where he was, causing a problem by using the necessary force to take him into custody. But in your general, that's the extreme end, where somebody may or may not, I may have to use physical violence in a way to subdue somebody who's either hurting themselves, myself, or endangering themselves or others. And in those moments, I'm trying to love all the other people around, including, my fellow police officers. But in, your day-to-day interactions where people are not, a lot of times people just want somebody to listen to them. And it's interesting. I had a call yesterday where a guy had a very injured cat come up onto his porch. And usually, and what I could have done is just say, I'm sorry, we don't deal with cats. The Humane Society doesn't take cats.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's not necessarily something that we would do. It's the same with wildlife complaints from time to time. People call about skunks in their backyard. But I, with my sergeant's permission, I went above and beyond, and I removed the cat. And fortunately, it was injured to the point where I had to euthanize it. But for him, I didn't have to do what I did. But in order to interact with him in a way that would show him love, and I guess if you could call it that, because he didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to do. He's like, I have this cat. It's on my porch. It's clearly injured. It either gotten hit by a car maybe, or attacked by a different animal or something like that. It's clearly suffering. And he's a cat owner, and he's like, I can't take it. I don't know what to do. And I could have just said, sorry, buddy. Like, tough luck.
Right.
And, there's...
And that you still would have been doing your job.
Exactly. And there are officers that would have done that, and that would have been perfectly within the scope of, our policies and what the law allows. And, like, yeah, sorry, fella. I don't know what you did, whatever you want to do. You took the cat onto your porch, like, he's yours now. But instead, I contact my sergeant, got permission to kind of go above and beyond and take care of that problem for him. So, but then even in situations where people are being difficult, and I don't do this perfectly all the time, but to be patient and to listen to them and to try to understand their point of view, as much as they allow. Like I said, if somebody's going to physically fight with you, there's not much you can be like, hey, let's just talk this out, fella. It's like, no, okay, we got to deal with the immediate safety issues before we can.
Well, there's a way, a Christian way of approaching, wrestling someone to the ground and handcuffing them as well.
Exactly, yeah, to be effective but not cruel.
Yeah.
To use means that are, that bring about the compliance you need without causing injury. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that, but I try to as much as I can.
Yeah, right. Of course, there's emotions and
absolutely,
and all those things. Yeah. I mean, something that I've sought to grow in, and I hope by God's grace I am, but it is just being willing to listen to someone who's they're saying things that are wrong. And
yes,
and being slow to jump in and bring correction,
right?
Instead of more trying to listen to the whole of what the person is trying to communicate, and overlooking some things. And I think because my impulse is to correct, and certainly there's a place to correct. It's important actually, but at times I find what's needed most is just simply to continue to listen, and there will be time for correction, in due course. And for me, what's helped me with that is just thinking about how patient God is with me.
Yeah,
the grace of God demonstrated in the gospel. While I'm still a sinner, Christ dies for me.
Well, and still, compared to him, so imperfect and immature, and even the most mature saint.
Yeah.
Is so far beyond the holiness and expectation of God's glory. That's why we rest in Christ. But to know that God is so patient with us.
Yeah. So there's I mean, God disciplines those he loves.
Right.
There's certainly
Yep.
a gracious correction from God
Yeah.
through the form of certainly other people in the church, his word being primarily a means of
Right.
correction in that way. But there's also this sort of long tether in which God allows us um, to make mistakes,
Right. Yeah.
to
Absolutely.
stumble, to put our foot in our mouths, while He patiently bears with us and loves
Yeah.
us and endures with us. And there's of course correction because He's a loving Father.
Right.
But those things really have I hope uh, more and more been informing sort of how I interact with others, because I know there's some people in my life right now where there's conversations um, that are very difficult, in which it would be easy to jump in and begin to correct all manner
Sure.
of what's being said, and but in the big picture, in those moments, there's an opportunity to serve them by listening,
Right.
by being kind and gentle, and building relationship,
Right.
and
How do you use questions in those moments? So just to kind of hone in on that specific instance where somebody is, they clearly, I mean, they have just some wrong ideas about something, or, they're theologically, you know, I mean, even as a worship leader, when your worship leader utters, 15 heresies in his 30-second exhortation, as the Babylon Bee article
yeah.
jokingly puts it, um, how and if you do, how do you use questions in those moments? Because that's something I've been thinking
Well,
about a
Tyler,
lot. Is
how do you use questions? This is how
it's I
this is how I use questions.
I want to grow in this because I think this is something I think you see Jesus do when the Pharisees ask him questions. He'll ask them a question right back.
Yeah.
To
He was
get
the
at
master.
well,
of
absolutely,
That.
to get at the heart of what they're really asking.
Yeah.
But I've found I can point to one of our pastors, John Steindel, and when I first started coming to Living Hope,
Yeah.
um, he's really good at that, like just asking you a question about something that you say. It's like, oh, what do you mean by that? And then it just opens up this world where it's like, wow, I didn't realize that that's what I thought about that.
Yeah.
But just asking that question or two kind of opens up what I'm really thinking in a way that corrects, like it's almost like not a self-correction, but God's grace and
Yeah.
revealing something that maybe I was believing incorrectly, or an attitude that I had that I wasn't aware of, or
Yes.
I wouldn't say I'm very good at it, but
Yeah. No, it definitely is. It would seem to be a skill
yeah.
that one learns and grows and develops. I think there's just generally speaking, there are different kinds of questions that can be applied and used in various sort of situations. So
Yeah.
certainly questions like, in order to help to make sure that you understand a person, asking, could you explain that further? Am I understanding this correctly?
Right.
Those sorts of questions help someone to feel listened to, and that serves an important purpose. But there's some general questions, I think, as well, that are easy to sort of file away and then bring out in order to serve someone. Questions like, um, what do you believe about God when it comes to all of this? Do you believe God is faithful?
Yeah.
You think He's good? Are you struggling with God?
Yeah.
Those sorts of questions can get beyond even just the emotions of that moment and what somebody is saying,
Sure.
to ask them how are they oriented toward God as they're navigating through perhaps like a difficult situation that they're describing to you.
Right. Well, and to bring it even back to, how God has changed us and made us a new creation, and how that changes how we interact with the world. I know that I think you recommended this book to me, is Questioning Evangelism.
Yeah, by Randy Newman, I believe.
And I remember you using that a couple times in just our interactions, talking about the kind of questions that you can ask, even as we interact with people who aren't Christians.
Yeah.
Questions to ask them to get them to think about spiritual things, and to reveal what they think about God and the thoughts that they have toward Him, and what they think about the gospel, and to build that relationship by learning about them, but at the same time getting them to talk about spiritual things and open the door to have discussions about the gospel and things like that.
Yeah, and going back to Jesus, and the way He asked questions,
Yeah.
um, is so instructive even when it comes to interacting with people who aren't Christians. So,
Right.
in that book, Questioning Evangelism, he talks about that, where it's someone might be asking you a question like, do you believe that God created everything? And so
Or
you don't believe in evolution. Someone
right.
could actually be asking that question to in order to have a discussion and interact and hear what you think about something like creation. But they might be asking that question in a snarky way to sort of mock you and shut you down. And in that moment, you have to decide what you want to do.
Yeah.
And so getting good at asking questions in that moment could be involve just throwing that back on the person. Why do you ask that question?
Sure.
What do you think about how the universe came to be?
Right.
And then you're opening the door for them to actually share if they have an agenda or if there's actually meaningful conversation. Because in one case, there's an opportunity for me to interact with what I believe and to point to the Bible and actually have a helpful conversation. And the other place, well, I'm not here to answer a fool according to his folly and
Sure.
enter into a gotcha moment.
Right.
So yeah, questions can help clear the smoke away and get to the heart of what are we even doing here in this moment.
Well, I know I recently had a very similar situation to that. It was the evolution question was there. So, essentially it's like, you don't believe in evolution? It's like, well, not on a macro sense. And so I kind of answered the question, but brought some reasons why I thought that. But one of the ones that I've encountered several times is do you believe that God really allows good things or bad things to happen to good people? Like the theology of suffering is one that I think
Yeah, well, that's
people come back to a
one
lot.
of the big questions.
Right.
Yeah.
And not to we're going to spend our next time right now answering that. So I'm going to put that back on you, Ben. No, I'm just kidding. And my response was, it's like, a lot of times I don't know. And so I think even being willing to answer that, it's like, those are deep waters that I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know definitely has a place.
Oh, sure.
In interacting with folks in order to demonstrate, perhaps if you're talking with an unbeliever about difficult issues.
Yeah.
I don't know, and let me get back to you. Can be important ways to express humility,
Right.
so that person understands. While we have the most fundamental answers about life and death and heaven and hell, because we know the gospel.
Right.
That doesn't mean we're experts on every nuance
Sure.
of the struggles of life. And so I think I don't know can even foster relationship at times by putting one at the same level that your friend is at, and which
Right.
you're both wondering and thinking together. So it can be an expression of kindness and friendship to be able to lay down, like, I'm not the expert. I'm not coming at you with all the answers.
I've memorized systematic theology. Let's go.
Yeah. As if even in that moment, just breaking out, some, bulletproof theological argument.
Is going to change their heart.
Yeah. Which we all know that actually it's the grace of God which changes the heart. Well,
Right.
there's certainly a place for that, and I'm all for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. God tells us to worship with all our mind as well as other faculties. So.
Well, I'm sure I can safely say that we are both grateful, not only for forgiving grace, but for God's sanctifying grace, which I trust incrementally is making us more like Jesus, making every Christian more like Jesus. And we slowly grow in our capacity and ability to bless people.
One small degree of glory to another.
Very small degree of
sometimes
glory
it seems.
To the next.
One minuscule degree.
So I want to talk about something else as well on this podcast. I know we both had kids. Our kids went to a local Patriot camp. Is that what it was called?
Yep, Patriot Camp.
Patriot Camp.
In Paxtangboro.
Yeah. So at Patriot Camp, basically they sang, our kids spent half a day singing patriotic songs, learning about
the founding
the
and
founding fathers,
history of the United
history of the
States.
United States, enjoying the realities of America and the
Sure.
blessing it's been. So learning about that, pressing into those things. I
Yeah.
did notice as well that the snacks at this Patriot camp, it was all like large icing covered donuts and ice cream sundaes. There was
cheese-covered nachos.
nary a gluten-free
Yeah.
or
A
sugar-free
lot of breads and sugars.
option. Yeah, which almost felt like that was on purpose, like America.
That's right.
Like thumb in the eye to the healthy movement. We're
That's
giving
right.
the kids cheese balls
Yeah, there's nothing
each
more
day.
American.
and every day. No, but what was interesting is, well, my kids really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did too.
They had a great time.
Mm-hmm.
It almost had me feeling as we enrolled them. I took them on the first day. Kate and I both went over and dropped them off, checked them in.
Yeah.
It almost felt a little bit like transgressive. Like the idea.
Yeah, is anybody in
our
a
day,
respectable society
yeah,
watching me drop my kids off at Patriot camp?
Yeah, rah America.
Mm-hmm.
I had that just a sort of inkling, like that this feels like something that maybe isn't acceptable in all circles to have your children
Yeah.
going to Patriot camp in order to celebrate the country we live in.
Right.
Which to me, I had that thought, and my second thought was how strange. That it seems like we're at a place in history, in American history, where for some people that idea is wrong, and
Right.
we're indoctrinating, perhaps even in their view, lies about
Sure.
the blessing it is to live in this country. And so that furthermore got me thinking about the Christian, living the Christian life in America,
Right.
or I guess any country really, and the idea of patriotism and how we as Christians in America navigate through, for instance, a glossing over the very real and significant problems in our history.
Sure.
That should cause us to think and consider and resolve not to repeat those things in our history, and glossing over those things, and it's just all rah USA.
Sure.
Sort of in the middle of our Christianity, which I think some people probably live that way. I've certainly seen it.
But there's nothing ever been wrong with the United States.
Yeah.
We've never done anything wrong.
Yeah, any criticism is an attack on freedom,
sure.
and or even mixing in what it means to be a Christian with being an American.
Mm-hmm.
You can certainly see that in politics, both on left and right.
Yeah.
Where people begin to take political positions into their view of how one must, what one must believe, and how they must vote in order to actually be a faithful Christian.
Right.
So there's these sorts of various positions, I think, that need to be navigated through. For me, on the one hand, I'm not a big fan of singing the national anthem during worship on Sunday, while American flag waves from the stage. But at the same time, I do very much appreciate and thank God for being able to live in this country and
Absolutely.
be free. I have a deep felt gratitude toward those who have served us by giving their lives and putting them on the line for the sake of our freedom.
Right.
But yeah. I was curious about how you think about navigating through.
Sure.
On the one side, preaching with an American flag wrapped around your body, and then another side that is, I think it was the New York Times had a video that came out maybe 2 days ago. So we're on the eve of July 4th while we're recording this, and this is one of the reasons I want to talk about this.
Yeah.
Video came out, I think it was the New York Times. It was basically a 2-minute video about, well, you think America's great, not so fast. We're actually not very good, and went through a litany of
I'm sure
of reasons why America is not a very good country, actually.
Yeah.
and you shouldn't believe that. So it feels complex. There's
Yeah, I think there's some
certainly
complexity there. I also
navigating through
yeah.
things, but how do you think about that?
I think it's complex, but I also think it's more simple than people will give it credit for. And I think that a lot of times people try to make it into a complex issue in order to push a certain political transformation.
Is that what you're accusing me of doing right now?
No, I'm not.
Tyler,
I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying
I made it complex so I can
people.
push
I mean, the heart of a man is deep waters. So, in all seriousness, I mean, there's complexity when anything you're dealing with people.
Yeah.
And so, but I think if you want to look at, and this is how I'd build it. So, a group of people is going to govern themselves in some way, shape, or form. We're going to have government. And we know from Romans 13 that all government is God ordained. So, we ultimately trust in God's sovereignty regarding which kind of government we have. And so you have everything from democracy to despotism. I mean, you got a range of choices as far as what kind of governments that, the mind of man, in God's sovereignty has created over the years. You have republics, you have democracies, you have a chieftain running a small group of people. You have, so I think that people kind of lose sight of that. It's like you're going to have some kind of government, and so the question is, well, what kind of government are you going to have? And I'm sure that none of us would want to have a despot. We don't want to be, be ruled with an iron fist, whether that's one despot or a community of despots or whatever the case might be.
Yeah.
But I also think there is a temptation to create an idol out of whatever form of government you have. And so I think that can be made in a very real sense. You have ancient kings where they were a god. And so where you were to worship them.
Daniel is thrown to the lion's den.
Exactly.
Because he won't bow down to the
or
graven
even
image.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They won't bow before the statue of the king. And so they're thrown into the furnace. So you have this idea that government and idolatry will correspond in some way. And so we have this tendency, and that the God could be the small God, small g God, could be a person, as in the despot or the king, or it could be the demos. Democracy is you could create a God out of the people, out of the will of the majority. So I think that you could go either way. And so I think if you look at how unique of a political experiment the American founding was and still is in a lot of ways, we can be grateful to God that out of the multiple kinds of governments that we can have, that our founders, who 50 of the 55 in the convention, the Constitutional Convention, were Orthodox Christian men. I mean, their argument I always hear is, you have, Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and all these guys, like they were deists. They weren't Christians. Like that's true.
Yeah,
and there were deists, clockmaker God believers. But then there also the majority of the men who founded or crafted our founding documents were Christians. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's this underpinning that. And the history of America has been, we find a group of people to which our founding principles didn't apply. And then we remedy that, either through amendment or, in the case of slavery, through the Civil War.
Or the treatment of Native Americans.
Exactly. So, we go through and it's like there's a group in our country to which we have not equally applied our founding principles. And it's a fight and we fix it. And I think that happened with slavery. It happened with Native Americans. I think it happened with even the civil rights movement in the 60s. So you have this idea that you have one person will look at the very real sins that any country is going to perpetuate against any group of people. I mean, you're not going to find a perfect system of government.
And our sins of racist policy, enslavement, terrorizing of the Native Americans
communities
are grievous.
Oh, absolutely.
And cause for great remorse.
Right. Exactly. But then you have the same instance, somebody will look at it and say, yeah, that was really bad. And we fixed it.
Yeah.
As best we could, or we moved closer to fixing it.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the reasons why slavery slavery was not outlawed in the Constitution outright is because there would have not been a United States, because the southern states would not have agreed to the Constitution if that would have been in there. And so, the framers of the Constitution knew that was the case, and so they didn't include that. But, some 60 years, 70 years later, it came to a head, and, over 600,000 Americans lost their lives. And there was other political issues wrapped up in, the Civil War, but the idea of slavery, we fought a war over it.
Yeah.
And so, you can either look at the American history as a history of, just grievous wrong after grievous wrong, or you could look at it as, all right, we found a problem and we did our best to fix it. And then, we found a more varied aspect of that problem, we fixed that, and so on and so forth. So to say, like, we're essentially using the same founding principles and fixing them over the course of
So you're saying it's complex.
Well, I guess that seems simple to me. We find a problem and we fix it.
Yeah.
Now, how we determine what those problems are, I think, is where you get into the complexities.
I think what you're saying, and what I agree with, is that I think it's appropriate to look at American history with a great deal of honesty and integrity.
Sure.
Both the good and the bad, and I think that's without needing to gloss over very real, grievous things, even in our history. But also recognizing that by God's grace, we've worked to, and we continue to work to correct and to remedy the sins and mistakes of this country, and we should thank God for that as well.
Absolutely.
That we're the kind of country in which where that sort of thing happens and is happening. There's countries that have been around for a long time in certain parts of the world where it's just it's been an oppressive, inhumane environment for hundreds of years.
Right. There's been no change.
Without change.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, certainly to be grateful for the founding fathers who, I always find it interesting. So this is just a sort of personal way that I think about it,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't necessarily think of America as a Christian nation.
Sure.
I think of it as a nation that was founded on biblical principles. So maybe a biblical nation, or something like that. Maybe that I'm quibbling.
Maybe.
Because, of course, Christianity involves the reality of the gospel.
Right.
And what the founders wisely structured our Constitution on were the very real and important, maybe you could say they're underpinnings that are necessary to understand the gospel, but the realities of the evil that's in each one of us.
Correct.
The need to limit that and to protect against the evil impulses of rulers who have authority.
Yep.
And so they wisely interacted with the realities of sin, and sought to create an environment that protected the people of the country and allowed for the greatest amount of human flourishing.
Yes.
While looking into the reality of depravity right in the face.
Yeah.
And acknowledging, of course, that we are capable of great good as well.
Right. Well, I mean, I think it was Adams in the Federalist Papers said that this only works with a religious and moral people. So essentially, and I think that there's a good amount that, can the government be big enough to hold back evil on a grand scale? And I think the government, to allow the most freedom and the smallest government possible to hold back evil, requires a good people. I use that in the small g sense with quotation marks around it, because no one is good, no, not one. But at the same time, I would say that one of the best things for our country would be is revival.
Yeah.
Because as Christians, we're to be model citizens.
Yeah.
And so I would pray that God would spark revival in our country, and not just for political reasons, because we would want to see the salvation of our neighbors and the people in our cities and country and our states, and but to know that revival would also bring about good citizens
Yeah,
as God changes us. And
absolutely. And I think, to be faithful to what the scriptures say to us as Christians and the way that we think about our existence in the world,
yeah,
um, I think there is a both and reality that needs to be um, pursued, as we live. For instance, we live in this country, so I don't have a lot of context for other countries, but it would
sure.
apply in other countries as well. Where, for instance, Philippians 3:20 says, our citizenship is in heaven,
Yeah,
and from it we await a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. And so I think for Christians, we must be careful not to place a sense of primary citizenship being in the United States and being American,
yeah,
but also because our citizenship is in heaven.
right.
That's where we're destined for a new heavens and new earth at the return of Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
And we long for that homeland that we have not yet seen. And in fact, the people in heaven have not yet seen it either,
right.
as they wait with us so
For
that
the
we
New
enter
Jerusalem, yeah.
into the New Jerusalem together.
Yeah,
But at the same time, there are many instructions having to do with how we conduct ourselves
mm-hmm.
in the homeland that we live in.
Right.
And it involves respect.
Yes.
It involves seeking to be a blessing.
Right.
It involves submission even to authorities.
Mm-hmm.
It involves faithful participation. And so I personally think that if one embraces both together, then the realities that God calls us to work themselves out. So
Right.
I can both appreciate and enjoy and seek to be a part of and serve in the country that I live in America, and to
Be thankful to God.
be thankful to God for that. I can sing "God Bless America" and
Absolutely.
other patriotic songs with gusto.
Sure.
But in the middle of all of that, I want to make sure that I have a robust appreciation for heaven.
Yeah. Absolutely.
and a longing for the return of Christ that tempers and informs the way I view my patriotism.
Right.
So I think part of the problem can be in the Christian church where we just don't think about heaven the way we should.
Yeah.
We don't think about citizenship in heaven, citizenship in the new earth that's coming.
Right, in God's kingdom.
That's ours. And so since we don't think about that sufficiently, and I would put myself there as well, I'm not trying to condemn others, then we have a very anemic or thin view of what citizenship, when it comes to the people of Christ,
Right. How could heaven be better than America?
Yeah, this is what we see every day. It's it's around us.
Right.
So I think in the middle of all of that, one way to ensure that one is being faithful in how we work out what it means to be American and Christian is, in the middle of that, there needs to be this cultivation of desire for heaven,
right?
Well, what appreciation for heaven, a longing for heaven, for Jesus to come back and set up the nation of God's people, the new earth, the new Jerusalem.
Well, that was my question. What is the perfect form of government? Christ's kingship over his new creation. I mean, that's going to be
it's the coming theocracy.
That's the perfect. Yep, that's the perfect reign.
God himself is in our midst as our God
and king. Yep.
And we are his people.
Yep.
So I think that that in the middle of July 4th tomorrow, we're going to a parade.
That's right.
Are your
kids
going to the parade?
They're going to be in the parade.
Are they throwing candy from the float?
Yes, they're going to be throwing candy
from the float, and so we'll be enjoying that time and
celebrating God's goodness
without any sense of guilt or reluctance.
Reservation.
We'll be entering into the happiness of remembering the birth of America on July 4th. But I trust and hope that in the middle of that, there is this foundational underpinning of the way I view my citizenship.
Yeah.
Where I recognize, appreciate, enjoy, celebrate even my citizenship as an American.
Mm-hmm.
But even more, appreciate, celebrate, long for the home country that is coming at the return of Jesus. And in the middle of all of that, trust that God is is helping me to be faithful as a Christian who's also an American.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think so. I have enjoyed a second century apologetic for Christianity. I've talked about
I
it
had a
before
nickel
in a
for every
sermon.
time I heard that.
Yeah. But it's called the Epistle to Diognetus. So it's a very early, probably the earliest Christian apologetic, which seeks to defend and explain Christianity in that time. And in it, I'm going to read a piece of it. Describing the Christians in 2nd century, it says, while they live in both Greek and barbarian cities, as each one's lot was cast, and follow the local customs in dress and food and other aspects of life, at the same time they demonstrate the remarkable and admittedly unusual character of their own citizenship. They live in their own countries, but only as aliens. They participate in everything as citizens, and endure everything as foreigners. Every foreign country is their fatherland, and every fatherland is foreign. They marry like everyone else and have children, but they do not expose their offspring. They share their food, but not their wives. They are in the flesh, but they do not live according to the flesh. They live on earth, but their citizenship is in heaven. And I think that's a beautiful description, I hope, for us as Americans and Christians in our culture, where we participate in everything as citizens, with gratitude to God. But we also live with this awareness that our heavenly citizenship is supreme, and that informs the way we both participate in society and also look very different than society.
Yes.
I look at what I just read where it says ethically, it says they marry like everyone else and have children, but they do not expose their offspring, which at the time that meant if you wanted to get rid of if you had an unwanted child, you left them out to die
from
the
exposure.
elements, or exposure to the elements.
Yep.
They share their food, but not their wives. So there's this sexual faithfulness, fidelity in marriage. I can't help but think that we have an opportunity to also be as peculiar as those 2nd century Christians in our society, even as we participate in everything as citizens, and appreciate how God has put us in this country where there is much freedom. And so I hope it would be said of us that even as those early Christians did not expose their offspring, unwanted children left to die, and sadly, there's talk of that in certain contexts, like Governor of Virginia or other places
Governor
where
Northam,
unwanted child, difficult situation, comfort the baby, allow them to die, expose them, essentially.
Yep.
But that it would be said of us that these Christians, they protect life.
Yeah.
They protect their children. They protect other people's children. They seek to stand up for the unborn. And as they share their food, but not their wives, as I said there, we also are people who express to the watching society the priority we place on faithful marriages between a man and a woman. And so there's this peculiar sexual ethic as well. So I enjoy that. You can Google that if you want to look it up. Epistle to Diognetus, if you're listening to this. But
to read it in an accent, though. Read it like an old-timey.
I should have done that. So there's this, but I think it's helpful to look at how Christians throughout history have navigated through some of these waters. Not exactly the same, of course. They're living in an oppressive empire, in which we don't. But to see their example, to look at the saints who have gone before us and see how they've navigated through these things as a people of blessing, faithfulness, but also peculiar people.
Well, to think, I mean, America's only a couple hundred years old, whereas
still an experiment, you could easily say.
Well, and the Christian church is 2,000 years old. So God has preserved his church through the fall and rise of all nations that have existed since then. So
all right, so I hope everybody enjoys their July 4th, or if you're listening afterwards, that you
Happy
did
4th
enjoy
of July, Independence Day, everybody.
4th of July. We can celebrate the freedom we enjoy and thank God for that, even as we look forward to the great and ultimate freedom that is coming as Jesus returns and brings us to himself. So, and that's another reason to celebrate.
Amen.
On July 4th and every day, actually.
God bless the USA.
Yes. So I wanted to, and we're almost at an hour. So,
all right.
I talked to somebody who popped open the last podcast to listen to, and they were like, "Oh my goodness, it's an hour long."
Just listen to it at 1.5 speed, then it's only like 40 minutes.
Exactly. There you go. Or you could slow it down.
Life hack.
If you really
#life hack.
Yeah, life hack. Good one. I wanted to end real quick though with a couple of media recommendations. You and
Sure.
I both love to consume various kinds of media, music,
Yes.
movies,
Mhm.
things like that. So I'm going to give a couple, and then feel free to share what you would like. I took the family on Monday to see Toy Story 4.
That's a good.
It was really good. So I'm a big Toy Story fan.
They're wonderful.
I'm a fan of the franchise.
Yeah.
Not just as good kids movies, but I think they're really wonderful movies.
I enjoy them more, I think, as an adult than I did when I was a kid.
Oh, I definitely do. I mean, for instance, my favorite is Toy Story 3. There's just some really emotionally complex and wonderful moments. So
there's some moments I watched that and I'm thinking, this is actually more adult than kid in certain moments. Like when they're riding a conveyor belt to the incinerator, and it's like there's some really.
They're all holding hands,
facing
death together.
Yeah, that was really intense.
In that moment of sort of sadness and bravery. Yeah, that gets me. But just the excursus at the end, really about the
Define
loss
excursus.
Of,
I mean,
well, so that where the movie goes at the end, where it explores the the sadness of leaving childhood behind. So the what we all must do. So there's a future ahead. Andy's going to college.
Yeah.
And so there's hopefulness there and enjoyment of becoming an adult, but also there's that loss of
the innocence and
the enjoyment of carefree play that he passes on to Bonnie. That gets me every single time.
That is sweet.
Makes me feel that that bittersweet reality, of the loss of what childhood was, and so Toy Story 4. One of the things I really liked about it. It was not just rehashing something or like, hey, it's the same basic plot line,
right?
But it was a fresh new story. As usual, there was there's wonderful kindness that happens between characters at times. There's selfless bravery, which I think is good for our kids to see. There's this attitude of serving that happens. Woody sacrifices. Well, I don't want to give it away.
Yeah, I was gonna say
there's sacrificial care for others and sacrificing of oneself for others, which that's
always a wonderful theme, and when you see it done well in film, it's very powerful.
And there's an echo of the gospel there, even though those creators would not, I'm sure, propose that. I can see it. I think anyone who is attuned to the reality that our best stories seem to all have echoes of the great story of Christ coming and graciously liberating and saving through his self-sacrifice.
Sure.
So there's elements there that can serve kids. I think it served my kids by not only just a fun time together as a family that we really enjoyed and laughed a lot. It's very funny.
Right.
But also some concrete, healthy classic themes of caring for others, serving others, and sacrificing for the good of others. So
that's good.
I enjoyed that immensely. The other thing I would say is on this 4th of July week, if you haven't listened to it for a while, this morning I was listening to one of the maybe the greatest sort of American themes.
Well, yeah, arguably, the composer being one of the great
Copeland,
Americans,
Fanfare for the Common Man, which was written in 1942 as a response to our entering into World War II. And if you've never listened to it, well, you might find out you actually have listened to it because it's in all sorts of movies and commercials. I was listening on Spotify, but you could find it on YouTube or anywhere. Aaron Copeland, Fanfare for the Common Man. It's a great way to set up your July 4th.
It is.
Experience.
That and John Philip Sousa.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, tubas.
That's right. I need more tubas on the 4th.
More tubas.
Gotta have more tubas.
So those are my recommendations this week.
Yeah. Well, in all seriousness, I mean, we're talking about 4th recommendations. John Philip Sousa. I mean, Stars and Stripes Forever. I mean, this stuff like that. You can find that stuff on YouTube. My kids love it, so we'll put that on, and they love to march around to it.
Oh man, yeah.
So She's a Grand Old Flag. I mean, Everett knows, I think, most of the words to that, so we'll put that on. And even though it's instrumental, he'll sing the word, she's a grand old flag, she's a high flying. So, I mean, there's stuff like that. But my kids love it, and it is cool because it for me, brings back memories of sitting alongside parades and having the marching bands go by and play all these great American marches.
We'll get to hear some at the parade tomorrow.
We will, yeah, it'll be cool. So I would recommend that for July 4th listening as well. So Aaron Copland, yeah, that's fantastic. But also get some John Philip Sousa in there for you, especially for the young ones. But I'd also recommend, this is a little known EP that Andrew Peterson put out probably about a year and a half ago. It's the Resurrection Letters prologue.
Yeah.
So a lot of people have Resurrection Letters, but the prologue I don't think is as well known, but it's essentially leading up to and including the crucifixion of Christ. So it starts off with the Tenebrae, or the Christ's final words on the cross. I think there's 10 of them. I think that's the Tenebrae? I didn't count them. But throughout the Gospels, it takes all of his final sayings on the cross and builds it into this beautiful overlapping piece that goes through everything that he said while he was being crucified. And then, there's this, probably my two favorite songs are Well Done, Good and Faithful One, where the chorus is, for the joy set before him, he endured. Because, Andrew Peterson asked the question, it's like, why? Why, oh God, would you suffer in this way?
Yeah.
And then he answers, it's like, for the joy set before him, he endured.
I
know, it's wonderful. And then the other one is God Rested.
Yeah.
It's just a really cool piece or look at, and it's all, it's, he takes some artistic license, but to think, like, what was Pilate and the Pharisees and Peter doing on that Saturday after Christ had been crucified?
Yeah.
That they buried their hopes of the kingdom he proclaimed. It's like it's been called the darkest day, like that Saturday where Christ was crucified before he rose again. But that's another one I've been listening to. Even just this week I popped that in, but God Rested and Well Done, Good and Faithful One or two that are just fantastic songs.
Yeah. Nice.
So it'd be my recommendation.
Yeah, any Andrew Peterson is worth popping in.
Yeah, for sure.
I was delighted to hear my son. My son especially loves Slugs and Bugs.
Yes.
For kids' music, and they make some great stuff. And walked by his room the other day and heard Andrew Peterson.
Yeah, he sings with Randy Alcorn. Is it Randy Alcorn, Slugs and Bugs? I think. Yeah. No, okay. Randy Alcorn's he's the author. Yeah, can't remember his name. It's Randy something.
Okay.
I can't remember his name right now.
The name, but my ears perked up. I was like, great.
Yes, absolutely.
My son's enjoying Andrew Peterson as well.
For sure.
All right.
Well,
Nice job, Tyler.
Yeah, you too, Ben. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Talk to you soon. All right. Thanks for listening to this episode. Thanks to Tyler for joining me again. Always an enjoyable time for me, and I hope for you as well. Don't forget to send in your favorite episode title to mailbag@livinghopechurchpa.com to enter to win a free book when the podcast reaches 1,000 downloads. Special thanks to Calluna Labs for the music on this podcast. Let me encourage you again to check out Aaron Copland, Fanfare for the Common Man. You can thank me later. Happy 4th of July to all of you. I'll speak to you next week, Lord willing, right here on the Gospel Culture Podcast. Till then, God bless you.